evening, and thank you all for coming. We are very pleased to see as many of you as are here, and we're hoping your voices will be loud and your ideas will be strong and very interesting and helpful. This evening is being hosted by the Stockbridge Affordable Housing Trust, which some of you may know about. We're fairly young. We were born last October, I think. And it's the brainchild of our selectman, Patrick White, who most of you know.
And maybe others, yes.
And it was, it took us a while working on learning about what I call the alphabet soup of affordable housing, which if anybody knows that particular part of the world, it's full of government lingo. And we've been educating ourselves and in learning from the other organizations in the county, and this county is we're extremely lucky to have so many smart and caring organizations that are really trying to make housing that is affordable by a pretty wide group of people. So we have 7 members of the trust, of which 4 of us are here. And Michaela is on Zoom because she spends her summer, she doesn't think Berkshires are quite good enough, so she goes to Nantucket. But to be fair, she goes to Nantucket because that's her business. So Michaela, thank you so much for doing this. And one of our members is had to be out of town. But we have Patrick White, who I think most of you know is our selectman, is a member. Jan Ackerman, who is vice chair and will be handling, she has graciously done a tremendous amount of work, an amazing amount of work to pull, and you'll be hearing the numbers and the information that we've been able to pull together about our community and what we hope it will provide the genesis for very fruitful conversations about what we may be able to do next in terms of providing more housing. Jen is a financial wizard and has been a CFO of a well-known Eastern university. For those of us who may have gone to another one, it's a terrific one. And then we have Liz Wheeler right here, who is a local real estate broker and has a long time resident of Stockbridge and her family. And we are very, very lucky to have her intelligence about the housing market here. In addition to that, we have Dr. Bruce Auerbach, who I think will be here shortly and is retired now, but was a very distinguished doctor and head of the emergency room at a hospital in Massachusetts. And he and his wife had a home here for many, many years, very active in the cultural organizations of the Stockbridge area, and we're delighted to have them. He's recently joined us. And he's coming right now. You just got introduced, Bruce. So you can make your entry. Anyway, and this is Bruce. Dun, dun, dun. Welcome. And we also have Mark Mills, who many of you may know, is a journalist and has done some really terrific things to help us learn from other trusts. There are 5 trusts, by the way, if you don't know, in the county. Williamstown, Lenox, Stockbridge, Great Barrington, and Pittsfield is new. Pittsfield and Stockbridge are the newest ones. Williamston's the oldest one, and I guess Great Barrington is the most active of all the trusts. This town has been amazing in its history of providing affordable housing, some with a capital A and some with a small a. But it goes back to 1948 when the town set up our housing authority. And we're not sure what they did from 48 to 78, but in 78 they identified at a meeting much like this that the big need in the town was to provide elderly housing. And they built Eaton Court. And it provides today it provides 53 residences and 8 group housing for I think the criteria now is over 55, which doesn't seem very old today, but it's been a tremendously successful project. In addition to that, after 1948, in 1957, a local woman developed a place called Riverbrook that many of you may know about. It provides housing for intellectually and developmentally challenged women, and is an outstanding, has won a lot of awards, and really is an incredible facility. And they have 22 beds and have done a wonderful, wonderful job. Many of you may know some of the women who live there because they're active in the community, and the town provides jobs for them, and they are active in a lot of the businesses around town, which is wonderful. And finally, our own community preservation group in 2005 built Pinewoods in partnership with Construct. And there are 30 units there for families and single families with children, families without children. About 22% of all the children who live in the town live in Pinewoods. So clearly we are not providing enough. And I think Jen is going to go on to tell you a little bit about what the profile of the people in our town are, and what the demographics as well as the population. So we'll hear from her. But I'd like to introduce the most important person here today, is Karen Sonneborg. Is that way did I say it properly? Very good. Karen has been tremendously helpful. She is a housing consultant, and she has put together what is affectionately known in the business as a housing production plan. But what that means is that communities come together and try to look at their situations and their housing needs and their general needs and prepare a plan. So this is step one today, where we're going to be talking about what we've learned so far, and Karen's going to be here as a resource and also to help us. Please come in, you're welcome. Plenty of chairs. Anyway, so Karen is here, and I hope you all come up and say hello to her. She is a wealth of knowledge and has been very, very helpful in putting together phase one of this plan. So without further ado, Karen, we'll talk about all the work you have done, and Karen and all of us.
Put your hands on them, use your outside voice.
Yes.
Am I blocking you from seeing the screen? Oh, okay.
Patrick, I'm going to need your help.
What? They're not advancing.
They're not advancing. So welcome. And I want to reiterate again what Randy said about Karen's participation.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Yes, I want to.
Speak up there.
I'm sorry. I want to again say how Karen has been in this process. She's done a lot of housing production plans throughout the state of Massachusetts. And
First, can you hit the button like it does? I can do it.
okay. So, and she has been, the analysis that we're about to go through, she has been the one who's collected all of the information, done the analysis, and she's done it for many other towns as well. So she's very knowledgeable about how this is moving forward. So what I'm going to try to do in the next 10-15 minutes is walk through what that data collection and analysis tells us about our community and about population in the community, the economics in the community, and the housing situation.
So right now, as we have in town, 1,638 housing units. Those could be apartments, those could be homes, those could be two-family houses. So there are a range of different things. 80% of them were built before 1980. And of the 1,638 housing units, 811 are occupied by full-time residents. The others are really have been short-term residents or part-time residents, second homeowners. And that relationship of about 50-50 has been in place for decades in Stockbridge. It hasn't changed significantly.
I have a question. So if there's an apartment building, it counts as how many units are in that apartment?
The apartments,
Not as one building.
not as one building. And the other thing that's important to know in this is that Stockbridge has passed, it exceeds actually, the state 10% requirement target for affordable housing. And that's because we have 3 different areas, which Randy just mentioned to you, all of which are included in the subsidized housing inventory, which is defined by the state. And it really means where there is state or federal funding that has gone into helping support those plans. One of the things that we see over the last 30 years is that the population, the resident population overall in Stockbridge has declined. And so it's declined about 25% or almost 600 residents in that time period. And you will also note that the number of households has increased from 724 to 811. And so when you think about that with the declining population and an increasing number of households, that obviously means that there are fewer people per household now than there were 30 years ago. And you see that very clearly in the data that Karen has put together. The other thing we might mention is that during that 30-year period, we've had an increase in racial diversity. And the way we're defining that here is the non-white population. So whether it's any minority population. We're also seeing over that same time period, the 30 years of decline in the Stockbridge student population. And this is a decline that I think Randy mentioned to you about in 2023, about 22% of the students live in Pine Woods. But we see over this period of time a decrease of over 50% in the number of students in town. We also see, if you look at the age distribution, that you are seeing more elderly people. And I'm going to say that being over 65 myself. And you see a significant increase in the last 10 years in the median age for the population. So it went from 40 to 60. And that's a significant increase in the median age, if you will. So we have fewer people under 35, fewer between 35 and 45, fewer up until all the way along until you get to the 65 and older.
Could I say something? It just, from the little bit I know about demographics, that is really scary.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that in 11 years,
Yes.
the median age changed 19
Years.
19 years.
That's significant. Yes.
I mean, that is really staggering.
And it speaks quite a bit to, I mean, you can see that, back in the slide right before this, but you can see that 742 people in town are over 65. So that's roughly half the population.
So has COVID played a role in that?
In the aging of it?
Yeah.
I don't know COVID so much. I would think what we're seeing, if you look at some of the other data, is that there are fewer people in this age group from 30 to 55, fewer children in town. So, and we're gonna see in a minute, fewer in the middle income category. So what you're seeing is that people are staying here, and some people maybe who had second homes, let's say, may be moving here as a function of COVID. But you're not seeing younger people or younger families staying in town or moving into town.
Another question, is there anything that says where the spread of those people are, what kinds of housing that they're in? Does it say that the bulk of it is in like single family homes, or is some of that in apartments, or whatever?
What we do know, we don't have we don't have the cross section of age type of houses. But what we know, there are a significant number of single family residences.
We do know, we had on the Stockbridge, we have kind of a distribution of by type of household, by income level and tenure. So we have numbers, for example, of seniors 62 years of age and older, where they are on various income ranges and whether they're owners or tenants. So we have that information in the housing needs assessment.
Where's the mics? There's one over here. Is there a mic up right here?
They're all in the back, Patrick.
Get as close to this as possible because one of the people just said they couldn't hear on Zoom.
Okay,
So,
close to.
well, if the mics are in the back, we could try to figure it. So maybe take one and put it in the middle table. I don't know if it's possible. Pass it over. Yeah, there you go. That's perfect. Joanna, is that better?
No, it's actually worse.
I think it's, it might be clearer. Let's try it and see.
Now that's better now.
Yeah.
Okay, so and this is another aspect of what we're seeing over the last 10 years or so is an increase in the number of people who are at the higher end of the income range and also at the lower end of the income range. So we're seeing a decrease in the number of people in the middle income range. And so which is not dissimilar to what many communities may be seeing nationwide, but it's particularly obvious here where you have a lot more under 35,000 a year and a lot more over 100,000 a year.
Why do you suppose that is?
There's no jobs here.
It's a very important question.
Jobs.
Right. And I
Well,
think
it's a systemic issue across the country, and there's a multitude of factors that go into that. And so, I mean, that's a really complicated question. That's not just about housing, but there's a lot of factors about why the disparity keeps growing.
We're trying to run through the data first to make a present and then get to the Q&A, and we're going to do breakout sessions. So
yeah, but I will also say one thing that's coming up that we haven't gotten to yet is that when you look at what the median house prices are in Stockbridge,
let's go.
you can't afford them if you're in that middle category.
Why do you suppose that is?
Because the inventory isn't there. The inventory, let me get through the rest of this and then we can have a conversation about it. Yeah, that's fine. So we're seeing, I mentioned there are 1,638 housing units. There have only been 40 new units added in the last 11 years. And if you look at where those are, we have an increase of 32 single-family residences and a decrease of the rest of them. The two-family units, a significant decrease, 57 fewer two-family units. More greater than 3 family units. And that may be some of the condominiums and so on that have been developed in town over the last decade. But overall, if you think about it, a total of 40 new units and 32 new single-family houses. So the mix of 2+ family units is really only 8 net increase over the last decade. And as I said, we have very low vacancy rates. Only about under 2% for housing units and under 3% for rentals. And if I think it's anything under 5% indicates it's a very tight market. So we have a lot of demand, maybe in part related to COVID, but also people wanting to move into this wonderful community and wanting to make a home here. So if you look at what these median prices are in 2022, and this is based on sales data, median price, sale price for a single family home was $575,000, the median. And that would mean for someone, you would have to have $115,000 if you put 20% down to put down. And you would have an income of roughly $148,000. That's assuming you take a 30-year mortgage at 6.5%, which was the current rate recently, and that you pay taxes, real estate taxes, and some insurance costs. And so that would be the income that you would be required.
Is that number skewed due to the amount of tear downs that are happening in this town around these lakes? People pay $500,000 and they tear it down, and out of those 32 of those, 25 of them have been torn down. So you're basically buying a piece of land for $575,000. Is there any difference in whether that's actually a livable property when it was sold or whether it was an actual sold property?
No, it was based on the
Median income.
Just the sales.
That would be very interesting to know of how many, if you take away the tear downs on these lakes, what's that median price? It's nowhere near that.
Way higher.
Way higher than that.
Way higher, yeah, we know that, but
that's skewed. That's not really what's happening in this town, that median real estate price.
Well, based on sales.
Based on.
That may not be.
the story's a lot worse by your argument, but it's not fair for, this is the
I get it.
data that the census has.
Okay, but
It's already bad, but what you're saying is much worse.
I get it. Mm-hmm.
And just to come back for a second to the income levels, at 148,000, 77% of the residents in Stockbridge cannot afford them. That's the median price, even with those.
Mm-hmm.
For a 2-family house, we don't have a lot of market sales data in 2022, so we're using here the assessor's value, which of course we know is generally somewhat lower than market. And that would be $414,000 for a 2-family house, and it would require $82,000 down payment. The reason the income is so much lower, the required income is so much lower, is because most mortgage companies, if you were to buy a 2-family house and rent out one of the units, the income from that rental goes to reduce the mortgage cost, and that would be taken into account in all of that. So as Karen was mentioning, we have quite a large number of people who are what we would call cost burdened. And cost burdened here means that you are paying more, in the first case, paying more than 30% of your income on housing costs. And the way, I just want to be clear on how this data is developed. This is data from a HUD study, HUD that has a Chase data survey. So what they do is they take a sample of residents in Stockbridge. They send them a questionnaire asking for information about their housing, their actual housing costs and their income and so on. And then they extrapolate that to the entire Stockbridge population. And they do this for all towns all over the country. So we can look at this, and I think it's a very significant thing. I do want to mention that since Stockbridge is a small town, and it has probably as a sample, there may be some statistical error in this. But even if there is, you say 1 in 3, let's say it's maybe even 1 in 4 if there's a little. That's a significant number of people in town who are paying 30% of their income for housing only. And if you look at the number of people who are spending 50% of their income, it's about 12% of the resident population. And I would also mention these categories, in both cases, the majority of people who are cost burdened are renters. When I was back on the median family income, if you look at renters, their median family income is around $25,000. And for homeowners, it's about $74,000. So that would make sense if this is predominantly, or the majority of people in this condition are renters. As we said, the median house prices have increased significantly over the past 20 years. These are data points based on market data, so these are based on actual sales during that time. This big increase in 2021 and 2022, I'm sure many communities around the country have seen some increase like that. No problem. Welcome. And so what we did was compare that to what has happened with the median family income in town over the same time period. And you can see it in 2000, it used to be a factor of about 5 to 1, 4.8 to 1. Now, in 2022, we're looking at 12 to 1. So it's a significant increase. And I'm sure some of that increase in housing prices, as I said, is seen throughout the country. It's not just here. But the decline in income, it's basically for the last 20 years stayed where it is now. And that's not taking into account inflation and growth during that time. So in real terms, it has declined over the last 20 years. So very quickly, I'll summarize, and then if there are any other questions, we'll take those before we move on. So the population overall is declining. There are fewer students and those in the age group from 30 to 50. We have more 65 plus year olds. Median age is 60 years old. Racial diversity is increasing somewhat, but it's low. And wealth and poverty are increasing. We have 1,638 housing units. About half of them are full-time residents and roughly half are second homeowners and part-time residents. We've met the affordable housing threshold, and that's important. And maybe, Karen, could you explain what it means if you're over that? There are certain rules in terms of what developers can and can't do.
There's something called Chapter 40B, which is comprehensive permits. And if a developer proposes a comprehensive permit, it has to meet certain requirements. If it does, and the town has over 10% of its housing stock, the ZBA would have the discretion to deny it if they didn't think the project addressed local needs, without the developer's ability to appeal that decision. Under 10%, or not meeting other kind of requirements, the town, without a really serious health and safety consideration, pretty much has to accept a comprehensive permit application that overrides local zoning. That's the important thing, is that that permitting meets certain requirements, but it overrides local zoning, usually involves more density. So it gives the town discretion on which projects to work with developers on versus which ones not to.
Okay, and as I mentioned, there are fewer units, very few units that have been added in the last decade, and their prices have been increasing. So with that, are there any other questions? Yes.
Regarding the income needed to support the cost of the house, the operating expenses and stuff. How much was taken into account, or are there any statistics about how many people have lived in their house so long that the mortgages should have been paid off so that the income level required to keep the house up is not based on mortgages anymore?
Yeah, we don't have data on how many have already paid off their mortgage. And and I would also say, we also don't have data on what the other assets might be that people who are homeowners might have, like 401ks or IRAs or whatever that would help on that. We only have income information.
But we do have information, I would think, that how long somebody has owned their house. Wouldn't that sort of factor into that?
But Jan, isn't the issue of the income necessary, it's not the income necessary to live in the house that they're in. It's the income necessary to buy a new house.
Oh, okay.
At that $575,000 level. So someone that's lived in the house maybe generationally, they don't necessarily need $148,000 in order to maintain that. It's only talking about someone new coming into the community or someone looking to come into the community. They need $148,000 in order to afford a median price house in Stockbridge.
And $112,000 for down payment.
And $112,000 for down payment, correct. So the issue that you're talking about is certainly very important in terms of, people that have been living there and, what, if anything, needs to be done to support them. But the $148,000 is predicated upon someone new coming in to buy a new house.
Okay.
But I think we're not, even when somebody's paid off their mortgage though, we are looking at prices of fixing things that are so high that there are people in town who cannot afford to fix their house.
Right.
At the price that it's at, try to get somebody to do it. Those people are fewer and fewer in town. So those are also things we have to think about.
Right, and we know from the resiliency study that was done in town a year or two ago, where there was another workshop similar to this, and we know from a number of people exactly what Liz said, that they're facing repairs and maintenance on their house that they are having difficulty figuring out, one, how to pay for, and two, who might do it, which is, it's another thing I will just mention, when you see the declining population in the 30 to 50 age group, and you think about where are we going to find future volunteer EMT people and so on for a number of things. So, it is a concern if the majority of people are in the upper age groups. Yes.
The statistics are pretty depressing. Do we know what they are for the surrounding towns, Great Barrington, Lee, Lenox? Do we know if they're similar?
We know a little bit about it. I would say we know what the median house price was in a couple of the communities.
I'm thinking mostly about the population changes.
Okay. I don't know. I have read through some of their housing assessment data, but some time ago, so I don't have that on the top of my head.
I was going to say that part of the rationale for the regional school district merger is both the significant decline in enrollment that the 8 towns have already seen and the tremendous further decline over the next 10 years that's expected. It's shocking, actually, how few students there will be as soon as 2030 in these districts, to the point where there may not be enough critical mass of students to even support programs like sports and music. Not because we can't afford them, because there won't be enough students to take them or to participate in them. So this fall, you're going to see all 8 towns on the same night, hopefully, vote on the regional district merger. And one of the key rationales for that is not only to preserve the quality of education, but also, to have some cost savings as well. And all these trends kind of work together. The Berkshires has seen a pretty significant decline in population over the last 30 or 40 years and will continue to. One study that Berkshire Regional Planning did suggested that the most recent one, in fact, that the population of Berkshire County will decline from 150,000 to down to 80,000 by 2060. So now who knows, you could have, people flight from urban centers, the fact that, maybe it's going to end up cooler here. A lot of things can change in 37 years, but if the current trends keep going, it's there's a lot of really shocking numbers. And I think to your point though, surrounding communities are a little bit less expensive than Stockbridge, of course. But actually Stockbridge's median income is the lowest of the surrounding communities. Of the 8 towns, we have the highest contribution to the school system because it's the capital side is based on property values, and yet we have the lowest median income. So it's really kind of a weird dynamic in town.
And I would also say that in addition to the income that Patrick just mentioned, the median house prices that I was talking about, we have the highest.
Yeah.
Ours is higher than Lenox, Great Barrington, Lee, Pittsfield, higher than anywhere in the county, higher than the state median family.
Just wondering, why does Riverbrook qualify in our affordable housing roles? I mean, I don't, is anybody, Riverbrook's maybe a nonprofit, but it's kind of it's a thing. It's like it's a business, if you will, even though it may be a nonprofit. But do any of those women who live there, have any of them ever resided, or their families, in Stockbridge or even Berkshire County? I don't understand.
A lot of them do. A lot of the families have or do now. Have moved here if they're a child.
And I think the reason it's included is because there is federal or state funding that has gone to help support Riverbrook.
But it doesn't help the general population as a whole. It's a small percent of, like, Pine Woods or Heaton Court is a totally different.
They're part of the general population. There's 22 people they have a little income, they work downstairs, but obviously.
I agree. I'm just wondering, I didn't know, it seemed as though, it's like Briggs or, it's a business. I look at Riverbrook more as a business.
Construct is a nonprofit. They own Pine Woods. It's a business by definition, but.
I get it. Yep.
If I could.
It's a school.
Right, it's a school.
About capital A and a capital A affordable house. And the reason that Riverbrook is included is that every one of those women are subsidized by a federal or state grant. So capital A affordable housing has, by definition, some sort of subsidy from the public sector.
Got it, understand.
And that's why it counts. So the county.
And it's permanent. So it's unlike the vouchers that are mobile, the units are permanently affordable. And that's another difference.
Okay.
There's a tremendous amount of, as you can imagine.
Yeah, just
government regulation. You could go nuts trying to think, who thought this up?
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering. I just didn't know.
The rules are such that it counts.
Got it.
And that makes us meet the requirement and gives us a lot more latitude in terms of what our town is forced to accept or can reject. So it's really a matter of flexibility that we have. I think what we hope to talk about today is what we want to do as a community and whether we want more capital A affordable housing, which there are tremendous needs. The waiting lists in all of those communities that we have are just astronomical. It's overwhelming how many people need this kind of housing. But there is also a whole group of people who make a very good living and can't afford to live here. Particularly the people who provide services, the firemen, the policemen, the librarians, the teachers, the town officers. It's
me.
There's maybe a lot of people in this room who fall into that category.
And hi, I'd like to ask about the statistics around the decrease in household size. I think that in that number, there could be a silver lining in terms of efficiency and conservation. If the building stock is larger than the current need, then as households decline in size, there could be an opportunity to create additional units within the existing building stock to take, existing dwellings and divide them into smaller units that are more appropriate to the smaller household sizes we have.
Michael, there's a lot of opportunities to do that, but let's bear in mind that one statistic was 80% of the homes were built before 1980, and there's building codes that require, for example, a point of egress for every unit, and that's either a central hallway or an outside door. Retrofitting old homes to do what you're talking about, outside of kind of the golden girls or golden boys model or whatever you're going to call it, is non-trivial. But it's a good idea. I think all ideas have to be on the table.
Yeah, it's really a case of remodeling. And I think that, while the conversation very quickly shifts to what developers can do, I think there's also a lot of power in what individual homeowners can do. And, money spent by individual homeowners renovating their houses to accommodate, tenants or guests or caretakers or changes in their lives is money that goes to local contractors and stays in a local community. Where money that goes to developers basically goes to developers and investors, who are out of town.
Can I just add to what Michael's saying, which I think is a good point, and I think part of what then becomes a bigger conversation is talking about zoning and talking about, because even if you are doing the work yourself, you are a contractor, you have a contractor hired, there's so many hoops to jump through and costs associated with renovations and permits and things like that. And so then it becomes a larger conversation around the building codes and the zoning in the town and how flexible or inflexible it is.
May I ask anyone else who is on Zoom, and Michael, would you introduce yourself so that we
And the previous speaker too, please?
Yeah, that's what we're asking.
My name is Michael Mullen, architect. I own a 2-unit property on East Street.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would like to introduce, which is my fault, one of our really important members. Michaela, will you show up again?
Yeah,
Michaela,
sorry.
who is on Zoom because she works in Nantucket during the summer. She's in the theater business. And Michaela has worked very closely with Jan on this. And Michaela, my extreme apologies for overlooking.
Oh my gosh, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, but Michaela's been a tremendous asset to our group and is a member. And thank you for joining us.
Let's go to the next slide and get to the questions.
Okay. Do you want to come?
Yeah.
Or do you?
Well, I'll just stand here. So we're over here.
Is the question period over?
Yeah, next slide. The next slide.
Okay, so there's a lot of nuance to this because as I think as we look at kind of categories of decisions that we have to think about, the question of Hegan Court and Pine Woods are purely affordable developments. They didn't need to be. Should we think about a mixed use? If we're actually going to build something, should we think about a mixed use? Should we think about whether it's driven largely by public investment or private investment? With so much of our housing stock maybe underutilized because we got a lot of big homes and looking at zoning issues around allowing for some flexibility there. So we've got really kind of taken a look at how we create affordability for middle income residents. That's generally not strategies around subsidies. Okay, that's generally strategies around, things like giving people the ability to add an ADU for rental. I thought for me, the most interesting fact that we just went through was the differential between what it costs for a single family and when you back out the rental income, how much less income you need to have if you have a rental unit. A rental unit might be in a 2-family or a 1-family with an accessory dwelling unit. So that was an opportunity to look at ways that, you know, as Linda pointed out, 575 may not even be a realistic number. If it's more like 700,000 or 800,000 for a house, that might require $250,000 in income. But maybe if it's got a little rental unit on it, because, you know, let's face it, you know, rents are high here. Maybe you can get that down to 90,000 or 80,000 or 100,000, which for more families is obviously realistic. So I think we've got questions around how we address this, both in terms of should we build something, and if so, should it be mixed income, for example, or purely affordable? And should we focus more, and maybe it's not either or, but on how we kind of maintain the character of our neighborhoods, but tweak the zoning a little bit to kind of get to the point where folks could do things like downsize into an ADU or something like that. So I think that these are some of the questions. We've got a little process we want to break up into. You want to go to the next slide, and we'll kind of, you know, I think that what we're going to look at is maybe in 3 or 4 little breakout groups is we've got a handout, and what we're thinking is take one of the big sheets of paper and just go through the handout, debate them, and come back after 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes running through each of the sheets.
Patrick, can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
This is a Berkshires-wide issue as far as I can determine. And you mentioned that we have 5 trusts, 1 for each community. So my question is, to what extent are we coordinating and communicating with these other trusts?
Well, we did have a meeting. The question is, are we working with the other trusts? We did have a meeting with all of the trusts from Berkshire County. What was that, about 6 months ago?
No, it was only in March.
It seems like an eternity. And there are cross discussions. There's some barriers to working together. You know, we're at 10% because the census number of homes here is 811, but the actual number of homes here is what, 1,638. So we're at 10% because the government doesn't count the other 800 toward our number. So we're lucky, because what that means is we control our destiny, whereas these other 30 towns in Berkshire County, they have less control there. So one of the challenges with working with other towns is they got to get up to 10%. And so they got to, so when Lennox has a development called Brushwoods that you may have read about in the paper. That's great for Lennox. But if Lennox wants to partner regionally with other towns, only Lennox gets the credit toward the 10%. And because funds are so short for these types of efforts, does it really make sense for West Stockbridge or Lee or Stockbridge or, you know, for Pittsfield to contribute their scarce funds into a project if they're not going to get help to get to the 10%? Because most towns would much rather have a friendly 40B, which is, in other words, the developer's got to come in and negotiate with the planning board, the ZBA, or whoever, rather than a hostile 40B, which you are at risk of under certain conditions if you're under 10%.
Just a question for the trust, because I've worked with the Lennox Affordable Housing Trust. Does the trust help people? Like we worked with the town of Lennox and they purchased 2 houses from us at a reduced rate. And then they gave the people, they did a lottery, unfortunately, believe it or not, because people didn't even know about it. So few people responded to it. They then gave those people a percentage of the down payment for that house. And those 2 houses on Hines Street in Lennox are now forever deeded affordable housing.
Right. So
do you help people? Do you have funds? Do you give people money? Do you try to find properties to buy with your money? And then
there's a couple of questions. The question is, are we doing down payment assistance or other programs for affordable home ownership? So that's a really
house. It wasn't a down payment assistance. They bought the houses.
Right.
They bought the houses and had somebody under, but
and I want to say, just Linda could have sold those at market rate, and 2 out of the 6 I think you developed was specifically for this program. And I think,
but that's not what I'm asking. I just want to know: do you do that?
We don't do anything yet.
Town do that?
We got funded 6 months ago. 6 months ago, we actually had our paperwork done. And the purpose of this plan program is for you to tell us what you think the priority should be. That's one thing. Now, the second thing is specifically about down payment assistance and other subsidies for home ownership. All right. Those have worked very well in places like Lennoxdale that still have very relatively low priced housing. All right. It hasn't at all worked well in Great Barrington. 2 communities have tried this, Lennox and Great Barrington, where housing is very expensive. And even with a little bit of a subsidy, people still can't get a mortgage and qualify as affordable. The other consideration with down payment assistance and or a subsidy on home ownership is real estate is red hot here. So if you take $20,000 as down payment assistance from me, but then your house that you're buying is limited in terms of how you can resell it for the next 30 years, okay, all that appreciation someone might have gotten, they're limited on because to get the subsidy, you have to agree that you're going to not make more than 5% after 10 years or whatever the rule is.
But it gets the people into a house. That's not a bad thing.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that the reason why the market hasn't adopted it in Great Barrington is because A, people still can't qualify for the mortgage, and B, people don't want to give up their upside.
But then they get no side. So you either give up your upside or you get no side. That seems to be not right thinking.
The Habitat for Humanity homes tend to be a more attractive in many communities rather than kind of looking at the spread. But look at it. At the end of the day, if you have income where you qualify, let's say it's 80% AMI is for family of 4 is $70,000. All right, and that allows you to qualify for a mortgage of let's say $280,000. Regardless, the mortgage can only be $280,000. So if the house is 6, it's very different than if the house is 3.
Right, but I guess my original question kind of got lost in the sauce here. With the commission, is that part of what your mission is? Is that how you start to help people? I don't know.
Answer your question. First of all, the sources of funds for the trust right now, until we have additional laws, are what's called CPC, which is Community Preservation Commission. Mm-hmm. And that's that extra tax, when you see your tax bill, there's a little extra at the bottom. Mm-hmm. That little extra at the bottom goes into a fund. And that fund is allocated in 3 ways. And one of those 3 ways is housing. And the most we ever get, this year we got 0. The CPC gave us nothing. In the past, they've given us 100,000. So we have 200,000 right now to work with, which is not enough money.
Randy, you just talked to Tom, and he would have told you that the CPC funded Pine Woods.
No. That's not. That's a whole different question. That's 25 years ago. What I'm talking about today and what the condition is, Kate, is that we have the sources of funds are not large. And Kate, you probably know that when CPC it was the people in CPC who made Pine Woods happen. And they gave over a series of 5 years a small amount of money, seed money, that allowed them to do the planning, the architecture, that kind of stuff.
Well, but he told me was that it was 30,000, 30,000, 30,000.
That wasn't through us.
Those increments. Or
that was
like maybe different increments, but the funding was through the CPC.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't
which is different than because the trust didn't exist. She was asking us about the trust. That's a whole different world.
What's the point on the answer to this question? Because we're getting a little off base.
The point of answering the question is each one of these trusts, there are 5 of them, have very limited funds. The people who've been most successful in that program is Williamstown. And Williamstown has a whole section of worker housing for people who used to work in the mills in North Adams. And so they have a housing stock just like Lennoxdale. And they give about $15,000 or $20,000 to each one of these. And they have an active program there. We in Stockbridge, because of our housing costs and for the lack of housing stock that fits Patrick was trying to give you a lot of numbers, but basically our median house price is 6 or 5 or 6 or 700,000 and a $15,000 down.
And you're going to continually be funded by that CPC money in the tax bill. That's how you get funded totally.
That's how we get funded
Got it.
until.
I didn't know how that happened.
Until Patrick has now developed, if we don't have very many big developments in this town, and they're very hard to get through because people don't want big developments here. And if we could get big developments here, you get a slice of that money, which will come to us. And we hope there are a few in the works right now. And so we might have some very substantial money, but.
I understand.
That's a good question, is if rather than 200,000 in the trust, if it was a few million, when you break up, how would you think it should go towards down payment assistance and helping to subsidize on home ownership, maybe at a larger level, rather than 15 or 20 grand, maybe it takes 50 or 100 grand. Should it go toward a mixed income, like looking at something like that property on Route 7 that is basically abandoned over by you all? Maybe there's some housing that we could put down there to make that a productive piece of land again, rather than just a hulking mass of asbestos and lead paint, which is what it is right now. There's finite resources. I guess one of the things I just want to remind everyone is, it was John Rind, Jay's dad, that made the Heaton Court happen. It was Mary Flynn, and it was Tom Stokes, and it was Sally Underwood Million, and a whole bunch of other people who made Pine Woods happen. Nobody's talking about hundreds of units all around town, but one of the questions I think that y'all should discuss is every 20 years, in 1980 we did one, in the early 2000s we did a second one. Do we want to kind of have a further investment, or do we want to put most of the money toward more individual homes? Like we could do, renovations of homes, even, there's block grants that you can do. So if a senior is relatively low income but needs a new roof, we could do a block grant program. We're going to have some resources potentially, and how we deploy those resources is really kind of one of the key questions I want to answer. John.
Well, one of the resources that I discovered back when I was ranting about affordable housing myself was that I spoke to a woman who was a mortgage broker down at Lee Bank in Great Barrington, who evidently is like the person that deals with affordable housing stuff, and what grants they give people up to 10% of the cost of the house towards a down payment. And she said, oh, by the way, why don't you check out the Federal Reserve in Boston, because they have a program that if people fit the income bracket, will give them, in addition to the 10% that we will put off, 15%. So essentially you have 25% of a down payment that if somebody goes looking for it, somebody qualifies, low-income person, that they've got it. Now, that's only one thing I have to ask. The other thing I have to ask is what I know up next to Keith Raftery's, there's a property that's been sitting there for years and years and years and years. It's just delinquent. It's empty. I've been in it. It's just horrible.
John, the LeBron Center?
No, he's talking about, I think that was in text title, John. And that's a process that takes 2 or 3 years.
Well, wait a minute. It's been more than 2 or 3 years.
We only had a new treasurer and a new town administrator.
Well, yada, 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 bureaucracy. Why does that have to pay for this thing? We've got that property. We've got Sam Shell up here. We've got a number of other ones around that are absolutely disgraceful to look at. And the town, if I'm not mistaken, owns a gun property down here on 102. Sell it, for God's sakes.
I don't believe we own any of those properties yet. It takes 2 or 3 years to get them up.
It's been more than 2 or 3 years.
Michael's only been here 2021, and I can't comment.
I've been hanging on that can for 10 years, Patrick.
I believe you. I just wasn't in office before then. I can't comment on it because I don't know. Yeah.
Could I interrupt for a second? I think we're an hour into our meeting so far. We haven't even broken up into our workshop meeting groups. I think we need to do that and get started on that, because we want to hear all of your comments back.
So we have a sheet, right?
On all of this, we do. So what I want to do is Patrick is going to stay here and work with the folks who are on Zoom call as one breakout group. And then we have some tables set up in the gym right across the hallway here. And we'd like you to go in there. One of us, Liz, Bruce, Randy, or I will be at those tables. And we'll kind of facilitate the discussion. You can choose whichever table you want to sit at. And then we'll meet back here. And Karen's going to supervise us all, make sure we stay on track.
Yes, every group will have a facilitator that will make sure we stay on time, make sure everybody gets a chance to respond to specific questions. And a recorder, so someone who will take notes on the comments on the flip charts. And then we're gonna have important at the end, we're gonna ask the group to present actions that they feel are their priorities to the full group on their flip charts. And then people be able to vote on those actions that they have preferences.
Can I just make a comment? You talked about the building code, some of the state codes and regulations. The Secretary of the Office of Economic Development was in Berkshire County last Monday. They had a form to solicit information, and they've asked us to go back to our towns. And if there's things like the state building code that could be modified so that it could be easier, for instance, to rehab a house that doesn't have a 7-foot ceiling in the downstairs, but maybe has a 6'7". Those things need to be recorded and gotten to the state. And since I was there as the Berkshire Regional Planning rep, if you could get them to me, if there's anything that is state economic development, they really want to help us, and they realize that the Berkshires are special, but we've got issues. So as you're going through and looking at whether you can do something or not, I just thought that might be valuable to know.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
It's in the other room. I think if you could split into groups of 5.
Yeah, there are 3 tables.
Take 3 cookies each.
Yeah, please take a cookie
and a soda.
Take a drink.
There's more drinks also in the case on the floor too.
All right, so as we start to think about zoning issues, about affordable housing, about mixed use, about 2 families, about how we try to kind of move the needle both in terms of sort of, housing that is subsidized and housing that isn't, I would love to hear ideas on how we answer these questions. What do you think are the 2 most important actions that the town should consider? And I just go around the room. Michaela. I'm calling everybody. You want to start, Joanna?
I don't think Michaela could hear you.
I'm sorry, were you saying me?
Yeah, anybody. So Joanna's name is up, so we'll start with Joanna.
Where's the mic here? Oh, I'm gonna bring the mic over. Yep.
Thanks, Michael. I couldn't hear for a second.
Yeah, it's kind of blaring.
Okay.
All right.
So, if I'd like to jump in a little bit right off the bat to get the conversation rolling, if you don't mind. I think, whenever you're talking about new construction, you're probably talking about market rate housing. And what ends up happening when you are working with developers to create housing developments, they're going to be looking at creating units that are $575,000 a piece. It's really not doing anything to move your needle. And I think that projects like that are very attractive because you're like, wow, we're making 30 units all at the same time, but you end up just supplying the top end of the market. I think that there's a lot of value in looking at what individuals can do with small amounts of capital to incrementally move the dial at the other end of the spectrum. If there's a lot of single people with $35,000 a year to spend, then that means, we're talking about like less than $1,000 a month in rent, which means we're talking about small units. and you can incrementally make small units without changing the character of a property, and without upsetting, without cutting down forests, without upsetting a historic district, without triggering a lot of other problems,
About repurposing existing housing stock.
Exactly.
And where does everyone think of that as a high priority for the town?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's super important that we have resources available for these kinds of things, especially if most of the housing stock was pre-1980. It requires a lot of work. And so how do we, I think it does kind of bring it back to what we were talking about, which is, I mean, my husband and I did a similar thing. We came in, we bought a 3-season place before everything went crazy for COVID, and we had to completely gut the entire thing. And we could do that because my husband is a licensed contractor. You know what I mean? So we still had to pay a lot, but we also saved a lot because of his skills. And so I think, but the challenge is, we had to wait at least even 5 months to get, we were reducing the footprint, and we had to wait 5 months just to get the permit to start. Or we had, you know what I mean? Like every time you have to build in the Berkshires, you have to pay thousands of dollars sometimes to even begin because of constant, and it's rightfully so. We want to conserve, we don't want to ruin the natural environment. But that is a huge problem for people in my age bracket, especially those of us who are carrying incredible student loan debt, who, it's a really hard thing to then say, oh, you can build a house or you can renovate this house, but it's going to cost you $5,000 to move that thing over there. And it's going to cost you another $5,000 before you even begin to get a turtle expert to come out and say that you can build. You know what I mean? So those are realities that I think we need to really talk about as a town, is what are the zoning things that are deeply important to the preservation of the town, and what are the zoning things that are so stringent that we can't even allow people to have leeway to be flexible to build.
Joanne, did you have something?
It might be in another question, but I'm a big proponent of having more flexible zoning laws. I think I tried to mention this in one of the last meetings about and it was kind of half kidding, but half telling, being realistic about alternative building methods that are cheaper to build. And I also think that it would be great if, if property were made available, that ADUs could be built on a piece of property without having a primary home on the property, because I think currently ADUs, in order to build an ADU, it's considered a secondary building versus a primary building. So those are things I'd like to see happen, at least for myself and some of the discussions I've had with PCA members. But that might be, part of another question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Can I just jump in really quickly? Yeah. This is Joe Short. Hi, how are you? I just want to second the speaker that ADUs and tiny houses by right in the zoning, I think would go a long way to preserve the character of the area, but be a readily achievable increase in supply.
Now, when you say by right, what do you mean?
I mean that the zoning without, as Mikhail was describing, that I wouldn't have to go and get all kinds of special permits and incur thousands of dollars of expense, but I could do, the proper building, observe building codes. There are building codes that exist for ADUs, and that I could do that and observe those and get it built, inspected, but by right could put it on my property as long as I fit within the footprints of my open space, etc.
Agreed. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to jump on with that one too. I think that it's a great point. I think that if you really invest in proactively zoning your town so that the zone reflects your actual vision for the future, then by proactively saying, this is where we want density, this is where we want it to be, more natural, this is historic, this is sensitive, If you do that on the front end and you say, okay, this is what all these setbacks and height limits and everything need to be, then when a property owner comes along, they can say, right, I can go this high, I can go that close to the property line. If I prepare this plan, then it will be approved. I think what happens a lot of times is that people are they're relying on environmental sensitivity or historic districts to create an extra level of oversight. And then the zoning itself is very loose and it's kind of like guidelines instead of standards. And so a person looks at the zoning, they come up with a response respecting what the zoning says, but then they get thrown into a review process where, environmental regulations, historic conservation. And so then you're rehashing and debating this design, where I think if you put more time and energy into proactively coming up with a master plan, which actually reflects the town's vision for how it wants to grow and what it wants to grow into, then somebody wanting to densify their lot can look at those guidelines and say, right, this is what I get to do. Like, this has already been determined. And they can design that and propose that and have it approved without a contentious process following.
Can I jump in with something about that?
Sure.
Something that's been concerning me ever since the ADU bylaw came up, which is not about who can create an ADU or under what circumstances, but basically who you rent to once you have it. Because I think that the economics, to me, there are two sides to this whole ADU and rental property, rental unit, whatever issue. One is giving homeowners a chance to make some money. The other is giving people a chance to actually live here by renting an apartment. And as I understand it, the economics for a homeowner were renting their ADUs as short-term rentals, that they can make more money that way. Yay them. But I'm more concerned with finding ways to create affordable housing units for people to come in here and live here full time. So to me, the issue of the ADU is like, well, great. If we let people create units, what do we do to get them to rent to full-time people at affordable rates?
Well, can I jump in? Sorry.
I'd like to jump in as tenant, but I'll wait.
Hold on, Joe first.
Me first, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut anybody off. I couldn't see when people finished speaking. Just to that point, I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about. And if we put all these ADUs, we don't want to just turn into a bunch of little hotels everywhere. I think that's where the laws of supply and demand start to kick in, though. At some point, if there are enough ADUs around, it's no longer financially the most lucrative thing to do to put them all on Airbnb. And actually, there's a giant overhead to running an Airbnb. And there's effort and labor that's involved in that at some point it becomes more advantageous to say, I'm just going to put a local person in my backyard in the ADU for a longer period of time. And that's actually easier and more of a win-win for everyone involved. So I think supply and demand will help that. It also creates a situation in which, I can live in the ADU and a full-time person can live in the house. So I don't think we should avoid ADUs because we're concerned about them all becoming mini hotels. I think supply and demand will help sort all that out.
Okay. I don't want to avoid them. I just want to say that letting the market forces to run their course is a big reason why the cost of housing here has skyrocketed, because the market forces lean toward people who have more money and can spend more money on a house and do the tear down or whatever else. And I think that if we wait for market forces to get homeowners to say, oh, can I make more money, just renting this to a full-time person rather than doing a short-term rental, we're going to wait for years. And I don't want to do that. I don't have any ideas for how to avoid it, but that's my concern.
We'll hear from Andrea next.
Hi, everybody. Hello, Patrick. So from what I hear listening, there is a huge need for people that work in town to be able to buy homes. So even though the ADU is a great idea, I really feel like something else has to happen. Mixed use developments, I like that. Not, that they have to look like an actual like development, but condos with a couple earmarked for affordable. That's where I would go.
I'd like to speak as a tenant on this issue.
Can you just give me a second, Joanna? I think, Andrew, to your point though, is that's the inclusionary bylaw we just passed does require for every 10 market units that a developer either build or fund an affordable unit. So I do think that we're trying to move in the right direction in terms of what you're talking about, either making it mixed use or funding mixed use somewhere else. Hi, Joanna, what do you want to add?
So I don't think all of these ideas are mutually exclusive. I think that, for example, speaking as a tenant living in affordable housing, in terms of where I want to be in my 5-year plan, ideally, if I had the money and perhaps the grant money available for down payment assistance, I would love to buy a piece of property, or maybe if the town were to purchase a piece of property and subdivide it into smaller lots, to allow me to build my own ADU on the property in a development in terms of, a piece of property, then everybody can, build their own ADUs onto that same property. This is an idea that's been successful in Great Barrington with smaller homes. I believe they've been having this discussion for a couple of years now of buying a piece of property and then subdividing it into smaller lots, making them more affordable for tenants or families to build ADUs on, or in tiny homes. So that's actually what I'd like to do if I could buy a piece of land or afford a piece of land in Stockbridge, and so that the burden of developing and building isn't necessarily on the town. It can be something that could be factored into each individual family in terms of what, and of course, there could be bylaws written for the property as to what could be built. I mean, they have to be somewhat flexible, but in terms of like what it's supposed to look like in the end and things like that. But I think that, that's something I'd like to see. And I'd also like to invite, there's a couple other tenants, PCA tenant members that I've invited to the meeting that are hopefully in the room there that would probably like to add something to this as well in terms of what they'd like to see.
Great. Anybody who raises their hand gets to talk. But I have a question for the crowd. We can do overlay zoning where with tiny homes, we could have experimental areas or special zoning where you could tie, for example, tiny homes to a relaxation of R1, which is 1 acre zoning, or 2 acre zoning, or 4 acre zoning. What does the group think about that? About lowering the cost of that entry level smaller house by maybe creating zoning districts or overlay districts that would facilitate, like for example, a tiny home community. Joe.
I think there's an argument that you could say, if there's setbacks and height limits and FAR limits, that you don't need to limit the number of units on a property at all.
I would, Patrick, I would turn that back to you and ask, what's the advantage of doing the overlay district and not just allowing everybody? What would we be gaining through that methodology?
I think, Joe, that
I think it would address the concerns that the town.
Wait. Let's let Patrick answer just before we, yeah.
My fear is incrementalism. Not my fear. My desire is incrementalism. I think that what we have is a secret sauce here in town. I know a lot of folks, and most of their net worth is in their home. All right, a lot of folks. And when we start talking about jiggering with our zoning after having 30 minutes of a brainstorm, I want us to experiment with zoning ideas, because you can't undo some of this stuff ever. And you have seen suburbanization of a whole lot of communities around the world, or even around the state, where folks had kind of good intentions that had unintended consequences. So I'm open to every idea, but I am open to every idea as we make relatively small changes. I can give you a couple examples. Like, for example, in 6.12 of our zoning, the select board is the permitting authority for special permits of pre-existing non-conforming homes. And yet our zoning says we must approve if it's not more non-conforming. And yet, to Joe's point and Michaela's point, you still got to come in and get a special permit. Well, if we must approve it, why are we making them spend 5 or 10 grand to bring a lawyer in for a permit? So that's one I think that we could take a look at that would lower the cost of the overall cost of permitting. We're in a relatively modest thing, because I can tell you in 22 years, only one special permit by the select board got rejected. All right. So this is kind of one of those things that creates needless cost. That's an easy one, but as we start to look at, some of the other ones, I kind of want to sort of see how it plays out, because I really think that the character of the neighborhood is what, protects a lot of people's net worth. And I'm not saying that's the right decision either, or there are some other low-hanging fruit that we can take a look at. Joe, did you want to comment on that? I see your hand.
No, Patrick, I appreciate you. Oh, my hand was up from earlier. I appreciate you explaining that. I think there's obviously rational thinking there. It does a little bit, Patrick. I would push back on you respectfully, because I start to think, we just heard this presentation with all these dire statistics. You pointed out the schools and those numbers. And so this incremental thing is ultimately, it's kind of built into it's community preservation trust. It's like everything, the whole brand of this town is preservation. On one hand, I moved here with my family because I appreciate that and I want to enjoy that. I believe in that. But it also is going to be the thing that ultimately strangles us if we don't make some kind of bold moves eventually. And I just don't think, I don't know. I'd like to see more action more quickly, probably.
Well, I think I feel somewhat in the middle, which is that I think in a population that we can see, even in this room earlier, where the majority of people are over the age of 65, and they moved here because of that, and that exists here, and that's the charm of Stockbridge. It is going to be challenging to make a big, bold move and get everybody on board with it. So there is something about the idea of taking a section, doing an experiment, and then I think it's about the way we do it. So if we decide, right, there's an area that we're going to build tiny homes, how can we then, to Michael's point earlier, make that a leading opportunity for an architectural competition that has to fit in the aesthetic of Stockbridge, that is environmentally sound and friendly, and we market it so that Stockbridge becomes so it's also about how do we not only do that well, but how do we tell other people and lead the way as a town in doing that well and share our story about that? And then if that goes well, the residents become proud of it. It's something they want to share with other people and talk about. And then it becomes something where then people open the door to say, yeah, we could do something else as well. You know what I mean? So I think it's the combination of those two ideas. It's like somewhere in the middle.
And that's where maybe great design, we need our modern day equivalent of Howard Rourke, designing the side of the mountain at the beginning of that novel. Michael, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's useful. I know this group has a lot of expertise of, different people working on this, but the notion of a planned unit development, very briefly, if you have like a 20-acre lot and it's zoned for 5-acre, lots per house, then your 20-acre lot, you could put 4 units. But the notion with the planned unit development is that someone, a developer comes along and says, if we take 10 of these acres and create a park, and then, with the other 10 acres, we have 1-acre housing lots. Now the property, has 10 houses on it instead of 4, and it's got a 10-acre park. And I think that kind of notion of like, you're tweaking, okay, the city's giving the developer higher density, but they're also getting maybe 100% affordability. Maybe they're getting, a 10-acre park. And so the park space allows you to create a strip of space that buffers the development from neighbors. And then the dramatic increase of density makes it affordable for the developer to create affordable housing that they pass on that savings to the buyer.
Sure.
here. And along those lines, Michael, you know, if 30% of the homes out of 100% are affordable, and you do that in one or two places around the town, then you can even override that 4-acre zoning and do half acre. You know, and that doesn't work if you allow that everywhere, because that's when you're really going to see an erosion in property values and the character of the town. But for a property like the Levan Beaupre property on Rattlesnake and Route 7, my God, it's literally a rotting piece of, you know, asbestos. I mean, it's like, there's no staircases in it. It's been abandoned for 40 years. And yet, the economics of tearing it down for 2 or 4 acre zoning isn't realistic. It's only economically feasible because of the remediation costs if you build 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 units on that 26 acres.
I would really want to caution the town against giving away development rights for like a 10% affordability. I think that 10% is just not that high a bar. And I feel like if you're saying that, a developer is going to get to develop 15 units, but only one of them is going to be affordable. I don't think that's much of a coup for the town. I think that, the market rate development handles the market rate end of the development world. We can, if we want to create affordable housing, then I think you should be looking at 100% affordability. And I'd say also that whatever land the city owns is where the city should start, the town. If the town owns land, then that's land that you can put to this use. To start giving tax breaks and stuff to developers, it's like they don't need it. They've got plenty of money already.
We haven't done any tax breaks, but we did add the inclusionary funds affordable housing trust, and it is not there's no tie between the special permit and the need to pay. It's just there's a need to pay now. It's an add-on. It's not a negotiating thing. Andrea?
I just wanted to ask a question about the property on Route 7. Is that the big white house with all the buildings?
Yeah.
Okay, I've had a couple of people call me on that, would-be investors.
Yeah.
It's a disaster, just so you know. I live on Rattlesnake. Not only has it probably diminished my property value, which I could give a damn about, but it's just a disaster. I lived within a mile of that place since I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And it was a camp for women to go, women to dance at. And they put in a pool and they improved the property. And this is when, I can't remember the names, Wood had it. And then it sat there and diminished into garbage. And then the Berkshire Theater Festival was given it by this guy named Levan. And I guess he gave him some dollars to fix it. And they fixed it just as little as they possibly could. And then they walked away and sold it for $100,000 to some guy from New Jersey who wanted to create the experimental gastro, I don't know, it was like I don't know what it was.
That property has 2 failed septic fields. It has a remediation cost of at least $1 million to $1.5 million. And to build housing on it of any scale, you'd have to run water and sewer. So that's an example of something where you really need to kind of think about an economic development plan for that property. I don't know if let's say the town gets $2 million on the inclusionary bylaw, maybe we invest it all there and clear the land and get it ready for the next step where it needs to be. But that's kind of the question is like, you're never going to build, 5 houses with the traditional zoning there. Not when the cost of remediation is up to $2 or $3 million all in and to bring sewer in. The economics just don't work. So you got to think about a different model if you don't want that property to sit there. This is Stockbridge. If there was a way to develop that parcel in a profitable way without some kind of intervention, they were figuring it out 20, 30 years ago. It's not. So some of these problems are kind of challenging.
Does anyone who hasn't spoken want to jump in and say anything, just so that we make sure we give space for that?
All right, well, we're gonna now, I'm gonna go grab the rest of the folks and try to reconvene. I would offer you a cookie, but Zoom doesn't work that way, so.
Michael, are you in this industry? Are you in the development industry?
I am. I studied social housing and community planning at Carnegie Mellon. I worked for New York City Department of City Planning. I've started a number of community planning groups and helped a half a dozen nonprofit housing developers.
That's awesome.
Spent 40 years in the housing field.
That's so great.
Thank you.
You should be on the trust. Be on the trust with us.
I would be delighted to be. I would look. So my email is michael@michaelmullen.com. By all means, reach out. I'd be delighted to participate.
That's so great.
Well, let's summarize.
MULLEN?
MULLIN, michael@michaelmullen.com. Thank you.
So let's just run through and what things I'm supposed to do, and I have no experience as a facilitator, so pardon me, but of everything folks talked about, what are let's just do a quick poll. What's the most important thing to you that we try to focus on? So let's just go around. Andrea.
Affordable opportunities for the workforce housing, whether it's building. I like the tiny home community, or another type of community. I liked the 10-acre park and the 1-acre homes as well. I loved that. And I think the down payment assistance as well, to help people get into these homes that we want to make, or that the town wants to make for its workforce to be able to live in town.
Okay.
And the feds are part of that, I might add.
All right, how about Joe? What do you think? One or two things you think we should focus on?
I think I appreciate a lot of things that were said here tonight. I think one of the focus points for me is a close examination of the zoning bylaws and seeing what we can open up without completely giving away the character of the town.
And specifically within zoning, are you talking more about are you talking about density, acreage, about flexibility on 1 or 2 families? Are you talking about ADUs? Are you talking about tiny house overlays? What specifically about zoning? If you had to choose 1 or 2 of those, what do you think about?
You're calling me out, Patrick. I would look at all of it, but I think specifically in this particular conversation, I think opening up to ADUs and tiny homes potentially being by right.
And I'm not trying to call you out at all. I just
no, I got you. I'm joking with you.
Okay.
All good.
Good. All right. One of the things I think about is our current ADU bylaw requires all of the other zoning requirements to be met to put one in, and 70% of the houses are pre-existing non-conforming. And you're bringing up a really good point. Laura, is that you? Are you on here? What do you think? We didn't hear much from you. If we were going to focus on 1 or 2 things, what would you focus on? And if you're in the kitchen or out on the beach or something, sorry for calling you. How about Michaela?
I love the planned unit development idea that Michael was talking about, and the sort of specific thing, Patrick's specific area of like a tiny home kind of world that you were talking about, just because I think it allows for us to talk about the environment as well, which I think is really important. And I also think it might go a long way to shifting that age demographic issue, which is that a lot of people who are in that 30 to 55, they don't necessarily want a 4,000 square foot house. They don't necessarily want to take care of it. They don't want to pay the electric bill. You know what I mean? Like people are living more simply. And that can also be true for people who want to downsize, who are older. So I think it hits a lot of buttons. And then of course, I do think the zoning, just having built in this town and in and around, it's really restrictive, and it can be looked at thoughtfully. And yeah, so I think those things would be great.
Julian, are you still on? What is the 1 or 2 things you would like to see us focus on?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yep. Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, got the TV in the background. So yeah, I'd piggyback onto Joe's comments, Michaela's comments. Yep, I'd love to see a piece of property that's been subdivided that I can build my own ADU on, that would fit into the design constraints loosely to any constraints that would be put in place for, in terms of preserving the character of town. But I'd love to have a piece of property that I can build my own ADU on.
Shoes, stores, the food court, and the carousel.
If that's the question. I don't know. Was that the question or did I miss it?
No, it's like, what is it in a dream world? How about Mike? Michael, how about you? What's the one or two things you think we should focus on?
I think any lot which is allowed to have a single dwelling unit should be allowed to have 2 dwelling units.
And should people be able to do anything they want on those 2 units? Could you rent both of them?
I'm sorry, the sound quality is kind of blaring for me. I can't understand everything you said.
I said, do you feel like if you're going to allow every lot to have 2 units, should you be able to do 2 or whatever you want on that unit, like a short-term rental?
I do. I think that a lot of it is about housing stock and building typology and actually just, creating the housing. If a school teacher lives there in the winter and a musician lives there in the summer, it's all good. I just think it's about creating the units.
Supply.
To me, it means so much if individual people are individually creating 1 unit at a time, as opposed to one big developer coming in and building 20 units. To me, that is like just a world of difference in terms of how the cash flows and what it means to the community and the diversity of housing types that are developed. One of the things that's really important to me is the idea that in every neighborhood, in every block, that you'd have large and small units, expensive units and cheap units. So if there's like a caregiver and an elderly person, or there's like a young family and an old person, the idea that there's like a big unit with a young family that's cheap and in a small unit that's expensive for an older person or something, I think being able to have different unit sizes and costs and locations is so much of the essence of having like a diverse integrated community.
Yeah. Shelby.
Oh boy, well, my thoughts are still pretty muddled. I think I'm thinking of basically looking at this from the 2 branches, two sides of. One is creating more housing, and the other is making any kind of housing that's new affordable. And I don't mean capitally affordable, I mean affordable to ordinary people. Which means, to me, finding ways to encourage building that is not luxury building, which is just about everything that's happening now, and finding ways to make both homes that will be owned and homes that will be rented available to people who, the people who we're obviously trying to target to get in here. And honestly, I don't. Whether that means cluster housing or what was just said about adding a extra unit to a lot. I honestly I don't have any brilliant ideas for methods. I just know that for me the things that we need to focus on are getting non-luxury houses built here and getting more rental spaces available. And either way, things that people can actually afford.
Andrew, do you have another?
Andrew, you're on mute.
Oh, you're muted, Andrew, sorry.
Okay, here I am. I just wanted to, while we were going that way, talk about the Section 8 program quickly. So do we think, like Shelby brought up some good points there, we need more units that can be rented, and people with Section 8 vouchers can use their vouchers there.
Yeah.
If we build ADU units, if people start making additional units on their properties, I mean, I know there's an education process there with landlords. Do we think that some landlords, you know, consider that, might rent to somebody with a Section 8 voucher?
I think I think that's a good point. And I think it has to, like, if you're looking from a landlord perspective, because the building costs are so high right now, an ADU still is going to cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to build, even a small one, with just what the costs are. And so the reality of that is what we have to incentivize the person building it or the landlord of that property to make it appealing to want to long-term rent that property, because that is the true reality, which Shelby was talking about earlier, which is like, why would I rent that property for $1,100 a month when I could rent that property for $8,000 a month? And I think that that's a valid concern for that person. So I definitely think if we can get creative with ideas about how to incentivize and you know, give the landlord the reason to do it, then I think it could be really successful.
And I just want to add one thing to that. Hold on. I lived in Dorchester for 5 years in my after college, and my neighbor managed 50 units, and 49 of those units were Section 8. And you know why? Because when the government is paying the rent gets paid every month. But we don't have enough Section 8 vouchers, and Section 8 vouchers create predictability and cash flow for landlords. And I'll tell you, Andrea, if you're in a position to get us more, we should, you know, it's great for landlords, Section 8 housing, because it creates predictability and cash flow. And that's why so many large, landlords in poor communities in places like Dorchester, really gravitate towards them rather than the market housing. Anybody else want to add anything? Everyone's coming back in.
Andrea, I have a question for Andrea regarding the project we had talked about a few months ago. She was investigating the Section 8 home buying program. Where are we at with that, Andrea?
Can we take that offline, because we're going to get back together as the group now, and we've only got about 20 minutes left, and each group is going to get 5 minutes and present their ideas.
We're now just going to have each order from each group come up and just present their priority actions to the full group. We'll take each group in turn, and then I'll explain the next step after that. All right.
So you want me to go first or what?
Sure, you're there. Go.
All right. So since we're limited to just the actions, we said build a new complex. We need a plethora of 3 to 4 bedrooms instead of just 1 to 2 if we want to get younger families in. And another one of our suggestions was that it could be mixed. It wouldn't necessarily be affordable. You could have some units affordable and some that would be suitable for seniors if they so choose and wanted to downsize. We said we should consider dedicated senior housing complex commensurate with mixed or not necessarily subsidized. We want to do a deep dive into zoning changes that could accomplish this, bring in younger families and get the vitality back into the school system and our workers and so forth. We also, in regard to the zoning, we want to look at accessory units. And we also wanted to explore sweat equity possibilities for young people. Like one of our members has a lot of skills, but he doesn't have a lot of money. And he has a great need because he has young family. And if there's a way he could get into some of our abandoned homes or semi-abandoned homes and we could work something out, he would be more than willing to work, you know, toward buying it. And
that dovetails with the next one.
right, and we wanted to explore a receivership program, and we weren't exactly, didn't have the details about how that would work, but we've heard of it. So.
What group is this?
That was mine.
Oh, that's yours?
Yeah.
I'll go for it, Patrick.
So I think we went around at the end after having brainstormed a lot of ideas, and a great deal of our discussion revolved around how we expand the housing stock through the market and through you know, exploring tiny homes, exploring ADUs. Some of the, you know, Andrea liked tiny homes, down payment assistance. Joe, I think, felt very strongly about the need to re-examine zoning. ADUs and tiny homes was really a theme. Michaela also mentioned tiny homes, especially as they're related to, you know, housing for young folks, and also the environmental benefits of a smaller footprint, which I think is important to remember. Really taking a look at more affordability through zoning and how we can do that. Joanna very much had an interest in lowering the cost of the ability to take a look at ways for homeownership, which easily dovetails into, you know, land grants or some kind of land, you know, shared land where there could be individual ownership with some flexibility to build what folks want at a scale that they can afford. And let's see, then we had Michael, a very thoughtful contributor, everybody was, really felt that by right, anybody with a single home should be able to do a second house on it. It's a way to create density while protecting open space. And if I'm getting this wrong, anyone, you guys can correct me after. Empower the individual really as an alternative to a whole lot of new development of open space. Shelby likes the idea of more housing, but more housing that is affordable, lowercase a, to kind of the regular people who are kind of shut out, focus more on sort of the needs of people for their, you know, to make it the realistically, you know, home ownership or at least a place to live. And I think that's everyone I took notes on. Did I miss anything? Well, we can go, the group can kind of tell me if I missed anything after.
All right, thank you. And
all right,
this group?
Hey. We got talking a lot. So zoning seems to be coming up a lot. Zoning was our number one priority. Financing. Now, financing was interesting because we were looking for ways to create incentives for people to build or people to rehabilitate things, as well as could the town buy some property? You know, could the town buy some property that we could put something on? The town doesn't really own anything we can do anything on. So that was something, or could we do it, the Affordable Housing Trust? So, and also, could you incentivize making homes more usable as ADUs or in-law space? So, you know, would that financing come from the town or would it come from us? Also, then the third thing was getting back our younger people, our 30 to 50 that were missing, because, you know, I was reminiscing about what town used to be like, that it was a family place, that you knew everybody on your street. You knew their parents, you knew your cousins, you knew everybody. And if you didn't know them, you were going to know them quickly. And right now, we don't. We just don't. There are a lot of new faces, and that's not to say that they're bad. They're just older. We need to keep this town going, because we're going to go in 20 years if we're not here. So let's bring our kids back.
Good.
And the last one.
You fine?
Yeah, I can. So, and how are you? So let's see, we talked about different ideas. Mostly we focused on the first part. Everyone hear me all right? Yep, okay. So one thing that came up was the downtown and the idea that you allow for residential in the commercial district on the ground floor downtown, which are zoning bylaw currently does not allow it. It did allow it at one point by special permit, but then it was changed, so now it's not allowed. So another idea was support for existing residents in terms of maintaining their homes, infrastructure, septics, a new roof. Let's see. Someone brought up the idea of a tax credit for accessory dwelling units, a way to motivate existing homeowners to do something along those lines. And then there was a plug for missing middle housing, and there was discussion of maintenance of what we currently have in terms of Pine Woods and Heaton Court. My sense is that Heaton Court is in better shape than Pine Woods, but the idea that really, take good care of what you have, maintain what you have first. That's particularly something that I believe in before taking on more. So in terms of a final priority, there really wasn't consensus. Ray brought up this idea of a survey of existing housing, housing stock, and survey of existing affordable housing stock. So I think that's it. Does anybody from my group did I get that right? Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much. We're now going into voting. So everybody has like 5 stickers in that strip. And those stickers are meant to vote on those actions that you most prefer. You can put all 5 stickers on one that you are really thrilled with, or you can spread them out however you would like among whatever strategies that are on any of the boards. Got to be from your group, but it can be from another group too. What?
Do people on Zoom get to vote on the stickers?
They don't have stickers. I mean, if there's a way, you think they.
So while people are putting them up, I'll poll the people on Zoom.
That would be a great idea.
Yeah. Where are they? Where are the stickers?
They were handed out, but.
Well, I mean.
Oh, I didn't get any in here.
Is the groups gonna have to get together to vote?
No.
No, you just walk around.
You go and do it. There's also one kind of red dot. If there's something that was suggested that you are in opposition to, you can put that opposition sticker on it. If there's nothing that you see that you really are adverse to, you don't have to vote with that sticker.
That's a good thing to have.
At this point, you can just
vote
for it. Vote, and then you are released. And thank you. I mean, Ronnie, terrific to have you here this evening, and your participation is meaningful to us.
Karen, do you have more stickers?
Okay. Interesting.
I'm going to ask them when I went around here.
Interesting.
So I need 3 more. Yeah.
I have money.
All right. So Joanna, what do you want to vote for?
You know what I want to vote for.
I'm having a low sugar moment, so just, you gotta explicitly say it. Want to put it all on?
So subsidized land that can be subdivided into smaller lots for people to build ADUs on, and more flexible zoning.
Either way.
Okay. You put all your stickers on that one?
It's not on there. Can you give us just a little rundown on what you said?
How about you, Joe? Joe, you still with us?
I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
No, Joe. It's not on your.
I know, Joe likes ADUs. I'm going to put all stickers on there. How about you, Michaela?
I don't think anybody got sick.
I would say the zoning and the
Down on the table.
tiny house / or planned unit development idea.
Okay. Vote for the things that you.
All right. I'm gonna put
one or more of the ideas you want.
Oh, yeah? Okay. All right. And how about zoning?
Zoning, but this was like.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna split you up 2, and do you have a 5th one you want to put up?
Zoning, there we go. Who's next? How about Andrea?
We'll do 2 on plan development, 1 on the tiny house, 1 on the ADU, and the other 1 on zoning. There we go. There's my 5 votes.
That was good, Andrea. That was very specific. That was good. I wish I had found it.
Yes, again, because I was still feeling the last one. ADUs are, tiny homes gets 2, ADUs gets 2 right up here. All right. All right, and who got you not got on our group? Michael.
I'll put all 5 votes on allowing single family lots to be 2 units.
Okay.
And I'd like to put 1 like veto dot on the idea of rezoning downtown commercial space for residential.
I don't know what the red dots are.
I'll get you that.
So are these red here? Because I put all reds thinking they were good things.
Here, I got it.
Oh, okay. So we got to put a big red circle over there. And how about Shelby?
I don't know. Became
I like Andrea's votes mostly, except that I would actually put 1 on the downtown, the commercial. I'd put 1 sticker with commercial. Let there be residential upstairs.
Where's Karen?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hi.
Which way? What do you need?
We need some stickers for Shelby.
Here.
All right, so we're doing 1 Shelby on the downtown zoning.
Yep. And then
I want to make money. I
have the zoning, ADUs, plan development, and what was the other one? Andrea had.
What's that? That's it, making it so that where you live.
This is
zoning, here, ADUs, plan development. I like that plan development.
I can't think of that one.
Zoning, right there. Plan development. You got 1 more sticker. You want to double it up anywhere?
Yeah, go for plan development.
They pay taxes. So the town could take it.
All right. And does anybody that has not voted on my group? I think everybody did. Plan development. Plan development. We're gonna find
Hi,
it.
Andrea. Thanks for your message.
Patrick? Or Karen, do you need me to stay on?
I think we're good.
We're good?
I just want to let you know the lobsters did not arrive.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Michaela, thank you. Thank you. All right.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Michael, we'll be in touch.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
But they know where they are.
Closing soon, huh?
Oh, I love this. I didn't know.
Are we gonna summarize these or just for us?
Yes.
Are we gonna summarize these stickers or are we gonna just analyze and get back to it? All right, so I want to thank everybody. It looks like we're wrapping it up. And we're gonna send out a summary of all the sheets. If anybody wants to send me your email or who's on Zoom, you want to send it to me. Michael, you're the only one I may not have the email address for. So if you want to send me yours, I'll make sure you get a copy.
That's right. But Ray is a little different than it is.
We'll have another.